Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to another Word of Gourd, and it's a little dark. Let me polish that up a bit for you. Oh, that's slightly better. It's a little sort of cloudy, drizzly day here. Not much sunshine, but we had some on the weekend, and boy, was it cold. Average Folks in the Afterlife, number 65. And we're moving on to a book, again, another old one from the early 90s, Albert Taylor's Soul Traveler. Another small book, just like Marilyn Hughes. 110, 120 pages, but a lot of interesting attempts at OBE and successful attempts at OBE. And I think there'll be much of interest for you here. Most of in fact, all the diary entries are from 93 and 94. And he's obviously been at it a while, trying, and has the usual sort of frustrating also-ran experiences where he's almost there, but not quite. April 11, 1993. Around 3:30 a.m., I woke up and had difficulty going back to sleep, so I decided to attempt to reach the vibrational state with the help of a relaxation tape. Something I'm sure a lot of you are doing, or have done, or might do. Halfway through, I stopped the tape and turned over. Soon I felt myself begin vibrating. I turned over on my back and tried to increase the trembling. The vibes started to surge from deep within me like the foreshocks of an earthquake, with my head the epicenter. That's the interesting thing to me about projection of the astral body, is this, the vibes being compared to the foreshocks of an earthquake. It's really intense. And but that seems to be what a lot of people want to do, is sort of banged over the head with vibrations to convince themselves it's actually happening. I, of course, prefer the using hemisync tapes, which seem to promote a sort of projection of the astral body, which is much subtler and a little easier, a little more difficult to sort of perceive and believe it's happening, because it doesn't hit you over the head. But anyway, lots of you seem to want to do the astral projection, so let's move on. I thought about floating upward. Just like that, I felt the top of my head rubbing against the headboard of our bed. The headboard had begun to slide downward. I could actually feel the vinyl surface moving past me. Or was I moving past it? Then suddenly I could see, but my physical eyes were not open. I noticed an eerie, non-directional lighting radiating inside our bedroom. There was also an intermittent high-volume buzzing sound. I thought to myself, is this it? I decided to get up physically, but I could not move an inch. I was paralyzed. This realization caught me completely off guard. This was the first time that I had experienced the paralysis without sleeping first, then waking up in it. Without warning, a humanoid shape appeared about 18 inches away from me. Startled, I mentally told it to move away. It did not respond, although it did become increasingly transparent. I panicked. I began moaning, hoping that my wife would wake me up, which she did. I noticed that the lighting in the room changed as I reconnected with my body. After waking, I told my wife about the ghostly apparition. She said I had not moved physically, and when she nudged me awake, my head was approximately 9 inches from the headboard. I had been about that far away from the headboard before I fell asleep. Well, obviously, he moved to 9 inches. Thinking about it afterward, I decided I hadn't exactly been afraid of the figure near me. I think that the buzzing sound, the lighting, the floating in the air, the paralysis, and finally the figure all overwhelmed me. My wife had described my head as being physically 9 inches away from the headboard, yet I had felt the uneven button tucking of the vinyl surface. Did I astral project out of the top of my head? I think he may have. I've read in various books that this is very common, though I'm not sure I'd use the word common. I've also read in books on Hindu religions, such as Yogananda's Autobiography of a Yogi. Excellent book. that something called a crown chakra is at the bottom of the head, top of the head. Something called the crown chakra? Yeah, it's like right here. I wonder if this may have something to do with my leaving the body that way. Whatever helps to create the exit for my soul appears to happen naturally. After numerous repeats of leaving through the top of the head, I have substituted the word natural for common. May the 1st, 1993. I woke up feeling paralyzed, a little frightened, but I talked myself out of it. I tried a different way to leave this time. I remembered reading in Monroe's book, Journeys Out of the Body, that an alternate way to leave the body was to roll out. Yes, that's a very popular one, the sideways roll out. I thought of rolling over, and I did. Then I realized I was looking down at my wife's face. I was floating about 12 inches or so directly above her. I also sensed a presence in the room, but it seemed content to stay near the television. I don't think I was watching television. I tried to stand up, feeling for the blanket with my astral feet. That's when I noticed the blankets weren't solid. My foot pushed through them with very little effort. Intrigued, I felt the vinyl surface of the waterbed mattress, and with the slightest pressure, I was able to push through to the heated water underneath. The plywood support panel underneath the mattress resisted at first, then gave way to my probing foot. Down through the plywood, I pushed to the carpet below. I couldn't believe it. I was standing in the middle of the bed, moving my astral feet across the carpet. I was looking around the room when the thought of venturing farther crossed my mind. With that thought, however, I must have drifted into a non-lucid dream state because it's all blank after that. That's often what happens. You're in the kind of exploring the bedroom, then the apartment or the house, then up through the ceiling and out into the neighborhood. Or the window. It's quite natural when you think about it. That's where you're going to be. It was a strange way to end an out-of-body experience. Normally I remembered returning, but not this time. Could it be that my jaunts were being guided by some unseen force which was allowing me to experience out-of-body experiences in small doses at a time? Yes. Guided by a guide or guides, and sometimes even the higher self gets involved in that sort of a thing. Sometimes the higher self sort of sets up the schedule, and the guides sort of are the enablers of that schedule. How shall I put it? I wonder if the majority of people have out-of-body experiences but lose consciousness or drift into the normal dream state and forget their experiences. I must have done. Indeed they do. An important key to this question might be to remain consciously aware, lucid and present in the moment in order to retain the memory of the out-of-body experience upon waking. But this appears to be easier said than done. This particular idea is what prompted me to develop the interrupted sleep technique. With this technique, my consciousness was capable of staying aware while my physical body drifted off to sleep. One of the strangest things I have experienced while performing the interrupted sleep technique is to hear someone snoring and to find out that it's me. Yep, I've had that one. June 7, 94. I woke up in the paralysis state, and without my prodding, the lower half of my body began to float. Like the hinged lid of a musical box, my astral body moved up and my head rotated backwards. The soles of my astral feet were pointing straight toward the ceiling. I was upside down and facing backward, but my astral head was still connected to my physical head. I hung there upside down, staring at the headboard of our bed. I couldn't seem to break free, so I gave up and reconnected. Next he goes to a class at the International Association of Near-Death Studies, IANDS, and has some good experiences with the class. One of which is, when you feel yourself paralyzed, just think of moving your little finger. You'll reconnect. With this added bit of information, I would be able to reconnect with my body with very little effort. There'd be no more panic and no more fighting my way out of it. Because of Dr. H, I stopped dreading the feeling of paralysis and actually looked forward to it. I think also going to the class helped him feel that he wasn't, what does he say? Some kind of wide-eyed weirdo. Sharing experiences, it does help. One night when he couldn't sleep, he's still awake at 4:30, and then shortly after going back to bed, I started my own pre-flight routine, as he calls it, that I've developed since my experiences began. Then the experience started. I felt my legs floating upward. Marveling at this, I proceeded to move my legs downward and right through the mattress. I kept doing this for a minute or so, up and down, up and down. My astral legs didn't feel like my physical legs, they felt rubbery or elastic. I could extend them or wrap them around each other, almost like a pretzel. I could also change their size and shape at will. Then something happened that would permanently alter my out-of-body experiences. The softest, kindest female voice that I ever heard spoke into my ear. Al? I panicked. Something or someone was gently holding my arms. Though the group was more protective than restraining, I initiated the abort sequence, moaning to be woken up. My wife was right on time. I reconnected and sat up. Not only had I seen, felt, and heard an apparition, it decided to communicate. I guess if I hadn't been aware of my fear of spirits, it was now. How patient my guides were during my early explorations. Indeed they are. If only I'd known something wonderful and totally beyond my imagination was trying to open a dialogue. But as I stated before, fear became a prison of my own creation. Fear is an awful thing, it really is. It really holds you back. Subconscious ones too. I believe that the majority of my fearful reactions stem from having grown up conditioned by controlling religious beliefs. My upbringing primarily taught fear rather than love and faith. I always thought that something non-physical and intelligent had to be evil. Boy, was I wrong. Then he's talking to a friend who says, oh, you should go to Ekankar. The Ekankar Society, I believe it's still around, was big in those days, 70s, 80s, 90s. I remember seeing the book, and you could, that's what they taught. I don't think there was any Ekankar near where I lived in Canada. There might have been, but I don't remember. But the books were around for sure. The name Paul Twitchell sticks in my mind. So he definitely learned some things there, some thoughts, some techniques, some the chant. They do the huge chant there, a bit like the Om chant that other people do. Chanting can be very useful, as is drumming. In fact, some people will seem to only project when they're in a drumming circle, which is fine. I've never been really keen on it myself, but if it works for you, do it. Let me see. In the Ekankar book, the author described waking up in the middle of the night to assist in soul travel. This sounded like what I had experienced the night before, or was it just a coincidence, the sort of interrupted sleep technique. And he finds it would lead to a new blossoming of astral activity. During a 10-day experiment between October 7 and 1793, I would have 8 hits out of 10 tries. I had 3 out-of-body experiences one night. 2 of them began unlike any of the previous ones. October 15, 93. I lay quietly until I became aware of a small scene forming between my eyes. As I started at the image, it grew larger and larger until suddenly I was standing in it. That's another good method. Nearby was what looked like a neighborhood street corner. I looked around and realized as before that I had no idea where I was. Feeling brave, I asked to see my guide, as I had read about in various pieces of metaphysical literature, pointing at a spot 10 feet in front of me. I figured that was close enough for a first-time meeting. I repeated my request, but nothing happened. I thought of my body and wondered how easy it would be to return. Before I could even complete the thought, there was a quick visual shift and rapid movement, and I was slammed back into my body. I wanted to go back, though. I lay still, and soon there was another picture, and what I learned is my third eye. I experienced the same sequence of events. Picture grew larger and larger until I stood in it. This time I leaned forward and flew up into the sky. I felt like Jonathan Livingston's seagull as I soared. Is that book still popular? It was hugely popular in the 70s. Millions of people read it. I think I read the next one that Richard Bach wrote after that, The Illusions, Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah. Boy, that was influential on me, I'll tell you. As I soared, I appreciated the incredible view of green hillsides dotted with an occasional house or apartment building. Strangely, this prompted an urge to return. I thought of my body, experienced a visual blur, entered and reconnected. In earlier flights, before I found out that I was really having an out-of-body experience, I didn't know that it was by pure thought alone that I flew. Yes, it is. A fearful thought would occur to me that I might lose altitude or fall, and immediately I would plummet from the sky in a panic. Most of the time I would pull back just in the nick of time to skip across the ground like a flat rock on a pond. I would then use my hands to push off the ground and climb skyward again. Other times I would fly at an extremely slow rate, a few feet above the ground, unable to speed up or climb. All the while, beknownst to me, my thoughts alone were the reason for these difficulties. In addition, reconnecting with my body had become quite natural. Rather than feeling helpless, I would merely think of moving my little finger, and presto! This decreased the time spent in paralysis significantly. However, I still found discomfort in the sensations that accompanied feeling paralyzed. The difficulty in breathing and fading physical awareness almost felt as if I were dying. Don't misunderstand me. It's not painful in any way, it's just very discomforting. The paralysis state, I believe, is like experiencing death in a small dose, sort of a mini-death. In a way, it is the halting of one's existence and the beginning of another. And isn't that what death really is? Oh yeah, sure. In the beginning, the sensation of consciousness teetering on the edge of unconsciousness almost always triggered my flight or flee instinct. And once that happened, I often aborted my attempts at an out-of-body experience and returned to the waking world as fast as I could. More recently, I received letters from readers who've shared that they often felt nausea, which caused them to fight their way back to the waking state. And still others have complained of a heavy non-physical force pushing them down through the bed. This has been dubbed the heavies or the hyants by some. And in my family, these strange sensations were attributed to witches writing as punishment for wrong deeds. October 23rd, 1993. I went to bed about 10:30. 2:30 I got up, used the bathroom, went back to bed. I sang "Hugh" softly for a minute and relaxed. My mind wandered into it until a musical tone quickly brought me to full awareness. The tone was not from any instrument I've ever heard. It was indescribable. I felt motion. I was floating upward, then I could see the entire room. I looked around to see if anyone or anything was in the room with me, but there was nothing. I was both relieved and disappointed at the same time. I thought about going up to the roof. As I went through the ceiling, I thought of my body lying there in the bed. Suddenly I was back in my body with a bad case of the vibes. I didn't want to stay there. I turned my attention to floating upward. Shortly I was on a collision course with the ceiling again. The thought of visiting my friend Kim came to me. With that, I started to move toward the bedroom window. I was halfway through the glass when the thought of the body re-entered my mind. Within the blink of an eye, I was back in my body. See how easy that happens? I was determined to get out again, so I attempted to disconnect once more. The next thing I knew, I was driving my car. Perplexed by the sudden shift in location, I asked myself over and over, is this a dream? I recalled Dr. H explaining that sometimes people create vehicles to move about in a during an out of body. After re-examining the situation, I thought of leaving the car while it was still moving. Whoops, bad idea. I still wasn't 100% convinced I was having an out of body experience, that this might really be happening. On the astral plane, things that are self-generated appear to be as real as the physical realm, or anything in the physical realm. I changed my mind and pulled the car over to the curb. For an astral vehicle, the car was very responsive and easy to park. Without opening the door, I pushed through it and stood there next to the vehicle. As I turned my attention from it, the car became increasingly transparent and finally ceased to be. I stood there astonished. Mental control, you see. I looked at my hands. They had an eerie glow about them. My entire astral body seemed to possess a soft, luminescent quality. I looked at my surroundings and, observing a nearby street corner, I asked to meet my guide there. I then flew to the corner, but nothing happened. I asked to meet the Mahanta, the Ekankar spiritual leader. I'd been told by an Ekis that the Mahanta was capable of soul traveling at will. Members also told me if I wanted to see the Mahanta during soul travel, all I had to do was call him. Strike two. It's a good thing I was so apprehensive about meeting spirits, otherwise I would have been disappointed. A thought of my friend Kim surfaced again. In response, I was drawn up to the second floor of a nearby apartment building. I entered a kitchen through one of the walls. I looked around for a minute or two, feeling like a cat burglar casing the joint. This made me uneasy, and I decided to make my exit through a window in one of the back bedrooms. It didn't occur to me that the apartment I was in might have been Kim's. For some reason, that completely slipped my mind. I dove out the window, turned left, and flew up an alleyway. I decided to experiment with speed and altitude. I noticed that I was able to exercise better control over these two elements. I thought of going back to my body and rapidly returned. At first I thought I'd reconnected, but I realized I had not. I was suspended halfway in and halfway out, looking around the room for what seemed like a couple of minutes before I reconnected. I then raised my head and looked at the clock. It was 5:37. I'd been traveling for over 3 hours. I had read that most dreams last only a few seconds or minutes, not hours. So this was one of the first indications that this was more than a dream. Indeed. Later I would find out two important things. The first is when I travel out of body on the physical plane, I seem to operate within the laws of space and time. But traveling at higher vibratory levels, there is no time. Yes. By this I mean I have had experiences above the astral that seemed like hours, but when I returned and reconnected with my body, only a few minutes had passed. A week later I thought about the apartment and how I arrived there by merely focusing my thoughts. I began to wonder if that was really Kim's apartment. I contacted her and described the apartment to her as much detail as I could remember. To my surprise, the apartment I described matched hers perfectly, even to a bedroom overlooking the alleyway. Later she sent me a floor plan, and at once I knew I'd been there. Not only was I rapidly becoming a believer in the out-of-body phenomenon, but I was becoming increasingly interested in interacting with spirits on this plane. Yet this was a back-and-forth process. On some nights, like the one 3 weeks later, they still unnerved me. Yeah, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I was dreaming when I became lucid to the extent that I was immediately back in my body and very much aware of feeling paralyzed. I felt 2 hands pulling on my hips, as if someone was trying to help me get out of my body. Yeah, a lot of people have had that experience. I projected mentally, "Stop it!" In that instant, I reconnected. All of this grabbing, touching, and pulling was a bit too much. Was still another entity trying to get me to come out and play? I couldn't help but wonder about its motives. Later I would find that its motives were far beyond what I could ever have imagined. I think back to these earlier experiences and I'm still amazed. To think that these entities, beings, apparitions, angels, or whatever they are, could actually touch me. But the thing that would amaze me even farther is that I could touch them as well. I can't begin to describe what it's like to be hugged by an angelic spirit. It has brought me the peace beyond anything I've ever known. A little later, February 1994. The strange minglings of planes occurred at this time. I dropped off to sleep with my legs intertwined with my wife's. I was jolted up to awareness by two sets of arms pulling on my astral arms. I also felt a great amount of pressure near my tailbone. I mentally projected that I didn't like that feeling, and the pressure immediately decreased but did not cease. I then reached up to feel the arms and hands pulling me. The arms were soft and feminine. I reconnected, opened my eyes. My wife said I'd moaned aloud, so she'd shook me with her legs. Through this, I learned that it's possible to have an out-of-body experience even though a human is physically touching me. However, Dr. H said that touching makes it difficult to have an out-of-body experience. February 21, 1994. My wife was on a business trip, so I went to bed alone. Aha. Attempting an out-of-body experience without my wife close by made me feel a little uneasy. I guess in a lot of ways I'd grown astrally dependent on her. Interesting. When the situation gets out of control with her help, I punch out. What's more, not all of my out-of-body experiences have been planned. Some have just happened. I wasn't sure if I was prepared for this possibility. I decided not to try any preparatory techniques. I drifted into a light sleep, and shortly I woke up feeling paralyzed. Since this was alone, I was very reluctant to get out. That's when I noticed that 3 or 4 humanoid figures were standing around me. They appeared to have hoods and robes. I wasn't quite ready for this, as if I ever am. I fought my way back to the physical and reconnected. See, there he does it again. Who were the new apparitions? They resembled religious monks. I wondered if I was simply dreaming or if this was an authentic visitation, and what could they want from me? Later I would discover that in fact the non-physical entities I had seen were trying to communicate with me, but I was too preoccupied with suppressing my fear. This kept me from raising my own vibratory level to that of the hooded figures, almost like partially tuning into a television station when you could pick up the video but not the audio. This was also my first encounter with what I later found out are guiding spirits. These spirits come and go depending on the needs of the one being guided. Yes. In a way, they were preparing me for the role of a slightly different sort of guide, a psychic rescuer. Indeed. March 14, 1994. I was dreaming that I was walking through my house when I became lucid within the dream. Good one. Good thing to do that. I was instantly back in my body, feeling paralyzed, except that in my third eye there was a picture. I focused on it and it grew larger. Then I was in the picture, and then I leaned forward and took off into the sky. Flew around for a while, then returned to my body. The picture in the third eye reoccurred and I flew again, but this time while flying, I felt drawn to a large one-story building. I floated through the front doors into a huge dining hall. The room was filled with humanoid figures dressed in 19th century attire. I immediately thought of Gone with the Wind and smiled, because I never liked that movie. Milling through the crowded room were 3 entities serving food and drinks. Although the room was filled to capacity, I somehow sensed that these 3 shapes as the only genuine apparitions. Feeling less than threatened by one, a female entity, I cautiously approached her. She was dressed like the kitchen help from a southern plantation. The female looked at me and then quickly returned to her duties. At first I pretended to talk to the figures at nearby tables because I wasn't sure what was going on. Were these 3 figures entities or not? What did I sense a difference, or why did I sense a difference between them and the rest of the figures? Why was I drawn here in the first place? Why did I feel the need to help them? I watched the female entity for a while, then asked, "What are you doing?" "Get back to work," she yelled, and then moved away. I approached her again and said, "You don't have to cater to these people anymore. They aren't real. If you don't get back to serving, you're going to get whooped." That's my impression of the accent. I wondered for a moment who was going to administer this whooping. I looked over at 2 male apparitions who glanced fearfully at me, then doubled their serving speed. I told the woman that I was leaving and that they were all welcome to come with me. "We can't do that because they'll come after us," blurted one of the males. I turned to the seemingly crowded room and announced, "I'm leaving and no one here's going to stop me." Where did all this courage come from? The crowd of imitation people showed as much interest as a room full of mannequins. I walked to the front doors, went outside, and was immediately followed by all three of the entities I've been talking to. "What we gonna do now?" queried the female. "It's simple," I said. "I'll teach you to fly." The four of us then headed down the street. One of the males kept looking back over his shoulder as if he expected an angry mob to burst suddenly from the building. Trying to ease his concerns, I turned to him and smiled. He seemed to sense my confidence and relaxed a bit. I instructed all of them to join hands, lean forward, and push off. We all flew. I kept low at first, then began to climb rapidly. I glanced back and forth, checking on my students' progress. Suddenly, without warning, they disappeared. After this encounter, I was filled with questions. Where did the entities disappear to? Why didn't I feel them as I usually did? How long had these three been stuck in this pseudo-reality? I remember Dr. H explaining that when people die, they sometimes become prisoners in their own self-created belief systems. For example, an individual may pass on and not know it, or refuse to accept his own death. Then he may continue to haunt an old stomping ground, castle, hotel, etc. It would later be explained by someone close to me that not only should I have helped, but that I was obligated to do so. As you have been assisted, so shall you assist. Very true. I was told that it is part of a universal law that is not only practiced on the other side, but was intended to be practiced on this side as well. Yes, true. Now you'll notice that he had an intuitive understanding immediately that the three serving people were the real ghosts and that the others were more like mannequins, likely not ghosts at all, but mental projections or expectations of the three earthbound ghosts who were held by their fear. And they would just keep doing these sort of activities for many, many years without realizing they were just repeating and repeating. And a lot of soul rescue revolves around this sort of a thing. I've done plenty myself, and we can find them in other books also. And you may find yourself involved in such activities, and don't be surprised. Because between those experiences where you sort of get out of your body a bit, and then come rushing back in, and maybe float around the bedroom and come back in, like the sort of thing that happened to Albert Taylor here, there will be other experiences that you don't remember, where you go farther and do more and learn more, but then don't remember any of it. So there's a lot of that to appreciate, that your conscious memories, the dribs and drabs that you do remember, are real, but the nights where you seemingly just sleep like a baby and nothing happens, those nights things are happening. You just don't remember. I became curious about the origin of the expression "the witches are riding you," used by my grandmother's generation to describe the paralysis. My aunt informed me that she had a book that described witches traveling out of body. She told me that while she was reading the book, she became so frightened she tossed the book up into the top of her closet and tried to forget it. The book remained there unopened for years. See? Fear. People don't want to know about that sort of thing. It scares the poop out of them. To make a long story short, I got my hands on this mystical manuscript entitled The Magic of Witchcraft. The book describes how witches were linked with the dead in astral travel and how they communicated with spirits while out of body. The book also explains how witches lingered around graveyards to assist the newly departed dead to adapt to the spirit realm. It appears that witches have long taken on the responsibility of rescuing lost souls. Was this what I had done? Could I be considered a witch? I began to wonder if this is how the paralysis became associated with riding witches. Was it merely a coincidence that witches also practiced astral travel? No, it wasn't a coincidence. They did do it, and the whole sort of Wiccan tradition is built around such things. And it wasn't just women that were witches, men did it too. I forget they had a different name, but wise men, and I read it somewhere. But it's the female witches that come down to us in history. And psychic practitioners like that frightened people, although people went to them for help often, and with health problems as well as communicating with the dead problems or trying to get rid of ghosts problems. But, the church didn't like it. And the church, as you well know, was a patriarchy and still is. And they want the power, they want the status, and they want to be able to dictate. And they still do. So surely we can put 2 and 2 together and get 5 out of that one. An interesting connection is that this theory of psychic rescue is described in the book Seth Speaks by Jane Roberts and in Robert Monroe's last book, Ultimate Journey. Yes, true. And also like all kinds of other books too. So, April 5, 1994. That night I went to bed asking aloud for help and having a conscious out of body. I lay flat on my back and drifted off into a light sleep. I woke up in the grip of a paralysis. I also observed that my wife was holding my hand. At least I thought it was her. I noticed the hand felt smaller than usual, almost childlike. This was frightening. I felt my astral body floating upward from the waist down. I projected, I don't want to have this kind of out-of-body experience. A male voice spoke into my left ear and I tried to calm down. In response, the voice changed to female as if it sensed my fear. The female voice was more calming, but not much. As if to further ease my anxiety, the voice changed to a soft whisper. I found this less threatening and tried to relax, but I still didn't want an out-of-body experience, soft voice or not. See, he's asking for one and then he doesn't want one. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, I tell you. This conflict continued for a long time. I would force myself to reconnect with my physical body only to start drifting out again. Finally, I reconnected and sat up. My wife was over on the other side of her king-sized bed. My back and hands were out of my reach. Her back and hands. So whose hand had I been holding? To find out, I lay down and swiftly went back into the paralysis. The hand was there again, softly holding mine. After I forced another earthly reconnection, I got out of bed, walked into the bathroom and said aloud, "That is enough. I have to go to work in the morning." Look, how another excuse. Looking at the clock, I was alarmed to see it was 1 a.m. The whole series of events had taken 3 hours. I went back to bed and slept the remainder of the night without further interruption. I had reached a stage when I was frequently contacting spirits on the astral plane, yet the instinctive fear I felt kept holding me back. I did take a step forward on my next flight, but conquering the fear would continue to be my biggest obstacle. So, yeah, and you wonder what past life stuff made him so afraid. Being messed around by witches, or spun yarns by his grandparents, or being a practicing witch and, maybe not being completely altruistic in one's motives. Because that's all possible. But he moves on and puts his fear in his back pocket and lets it go, which I hope all you will do too. And until number, 66, is more of Soul Traveler, I shall bid you a fond farewell. Au revoir, and all that kind of stuff. And urge you, as I've done before, to not worry. Be happy.